is very good. The swing works, the oracle again.
And the Yorker bowled in. That is out. Great theatre, magnificent drama.
First match of the season, eh, Howard?
First match of the season, Martin.
King Willow's on his throne and all's right with the world.
Gods and Flannelled Fools. It's from a poem about cricket.
Oh, very apt. How does it go on, my old Howard?
That's the only line I know.
Oh, but never mind, you certainly made the point.
Hello and welcome to Gods and Flannelled Fools, Episode 8, Lakers Ashes. This is the series in which I walk through a history of English Test match cricket, focusing on key series, matches, players, teams of a particular interest, and basically exploring the myths and legends of the game that collectively have led to how we view Test match cricket today. If you haven't listened already, my pilot episode, A Brief History of the Game, up to the very first 2 Test matches in 1877, is available, as well as the first 7 episodes, which I cover a variety of series, themes and individuals ranging from Sidney Barnes, Jack Hobbs, Wally Hammond, through to the Bodyline series and covering timeless tests. So worth checking those out on my channel. There's a Twitter profile for the series, at GFFpod, and I'll also make some notes in support of this on the blog, which is available at godsandflannelledfools.blogspot.com. As ever, please do get in touch, leave comments and questions, because it really helps me to prepare content for future editions. So if you do have any specific series of interests, once again, please do let me know. Now, in the last episode, I covered the 1948 Home Ashes series, which was rather an unhappy affair for England, who were roundly thumped by a very powerful Australia team who were dubbed the Invincibles, led by the legendary Don Bradman and featuring a host of great names, including the cavalier all-rounder Keith Miller. It's fair to say that the Australian team emerged from the Second World War in much better shape than England, although England did have a number of players who would go on to become household names and enjoy a sustained period of success. And this was a trend that began to take shape and emerge as the 40s gave way to the 50s, and the country finally managed to move on from the wreckage of the war years. In the 1950 to 51 away Ashes series that followed, England, who were still then under the umbrella of the MCC when it came to the touring party, they sent a weakened side, and they were comprehensively beaten for the 5th consecutive time since 1933. And in fact, their consolation victory in the 5th and final match of that series was the first Test victory over their old rivals since 1938. Such was the sort of run of poor results. But from that point onwards, things began to get better. In the 1953 home series, England won 1-0 to reclaim the Ashes after the long period of drought. And then they kicked on to retain the urn in the 1954 to 55 series, a series in which they, positively banished the pain of the previous years with a highly dominant display led by the fearsome pace of Frank Tyson. Now, rather like Harold Larwood before him, Frank Tyson was a bowler who had flat-out pace, which was really made for the hard, bouncy Australian wickets. And his inclusion in the touring party for that particular tour coincided with a purple patch in which everything came together in terms of his action and his rhythm, and he absolutely slaughtered the Australia batting lineup on multiple occasions. Interestingly, Frank Tyson, like Harold Larwood, was not a large man, but shortly before the tour, he gained a considerable amount of weight due to the fact that rationing had finally been stopped by the British government. And he managed to put on an extra 10 kilograms in muscle bulk, which at the time, with a complete lack of sports science, was considerable, and it led him to be able to increase his pace. In the first test, he landed a number of blows on the Australian batsman, and then he curiously reduced his run-up, which generated more balance and rhythm by the time the second test took place. And this was a match in which he was actually hit on the head by the Australian bowler Ray Lindwell whilst batting, and in retribution he took 6 for 16 in the third test, earning him the reputation of Typhoon Tyson, and continuing to skittle the Aussies out in the final 2 test matches, leading to a famous 3-1 series victory. And just looking at those reports, one might draw comparison to the series in the 1990s, in which Devon Malcolm was hit on the helmet and subsequently took 9 wickets in one innings against South Africa, having uttered, "You guys are history." So in keeping with the Larwood comparison, Tyson's career never quite lived up to this stunning success overseas. Although he returned home to a hero's welcome, his county, Northamptonshire, refused to pay for a civic welcome and continued to produce very slow, stodgy wickets, which were completely unsuited to his pace. Over the course of the remainder of the decade, he was unable to bowl with anything like the effectiveness that he'd really enjoyed down under, and his career suffered with only occasional glimpses of his searing pace whilst playing on green test wickets. Perhaps the first of many examples of the English county game being a graveyard for fast bowlers through to the present day, unfortunately.
Len Hutton and his lads now lead the Australians by 2-1 following their sensational victory in the Melbourne Test. There can have been few more thrilling games than the third Test. The issue hung in the balance until the Aussies began their second innings, needing 240 to win. Then Tyson took the ball. Tyson, the Typhoon, hurled them down with devastating effect. Quickly the wickets began to tumble. Brilliant behind the stumps was Godfrey Evans, who took 3 catches. Brian Statham was the third man in the vanguard of England's attack. It was he who started the collapse. He bowled magnificently, yet claimed only 2 victims. Vice-captain Arthur Morris fell to Tyson. So did Benno, and Harvey, and Miller. Then 3 ducks, Maddox, Lindwall, and Johnston. Tyson's reign of terror had smashed the Aussies.
Aside from Tyson, however, England had a number of star names, both with bat and ball. At the top of the order, there was the departing Bill Edrich, a fearless attacking batsman whose best years had been lost to the war. Denis Compton had also lost out during the war, but had still emerged as a world-class batsman and also a successful footballer, winning the league and FA Cup with Arsenal, something really unimaginable today. As a dashing, attacking batsman, Compton stood out as a lone success in the 1948 defeat against Bradman's Invincibles. And he registered an amazing 10 Test centuries in a 2-year period between 1947 and 49. Domestically, his record was even more impressive, being one of only a few players to score over 100 first-class centuries, including the fastest ever triple century on a MCC tour to South Africa in 1948 to 49. Both Edrich and Compton have gone down as legends of the game, and they have stands named after them at Lord's, both having represented Middlesex County Cricket Club. At the top of England's order in the late 40s and early 50s was none other than Len Hutton, a technically gifted opening batsman from Yorkshire, who again lost a number of his best years to the war, actually recovering from a serious war injury to lead England in the aftermath. Hutton hit 364 in only his 6th Test match in 1938, a record for the highest ever Test innings that lasted 20 years until Gary Sobers beat it. And he was another batsman to register over 100 first-class hundreds, 19 of them coming in Test matches. Of all the batsmen of this particular era, however, it was probably Peter May who caught the imagination when it came to style, and alongside the equally stylish Tom Graveney, he was a nod to the yesteryear of cricket's golden age with his attacking, fluid stroke play and general elegance at the crease. Peter May made his Test debut in 1951, scoring a magnificent 165 against South Africa. And he went from strength to strength for the best part of a decade until eventually the burden of captaincy began to detract from his ability, and he went into his shell. He took over as England captain from Len Hutton in 1955 and led them to an undefeated run throughout the remainder of the decade with some magnificent series victories over all the major teams of the day, and including a historic 285 not out in a famous partnership of 411 with Colin Cowdrey against the West Indies, which was the highest score by an English captain until Gooch's 333 at Lord's in 1990. And even to this day, it will come up on the TV screens as the highest partnership for any wicket by any English batsman. So those are the batsmen. Moving back onto the bowlers, while the poor management of the lightning-fast Frank Tyson was a loss to English cricket, there was no shortage of seam bowlers. Leading the way in the post-war years was the reliable Alec Bedser, a fast medium bowler from Surrey who took over 230 wickets in 51 tests. And he was followed into the team by the Roses partnership of Fred Trueman from Yorkshire and Brian Statham from Lancashire. And these two would form the basis of England's opening attack from the early 50s through to the 1960s. Although in Trueman's case, his belligerent attitude and disdain for the cricketing authorities in general meant that this run would include a number of periods in and out of the team, more down to fallouts than anything to do with his actual ability. Brian Statham would go on to take 252 wickets over a 70-test career, and Fred Trueman would take 307 wickets in 67 tests at an average of 21.57, and this was a test record for number of wickets taken until Denis Lilly broke it a couple of decades later. This duo, I would say, would have been comparable to Broad and Anderson in terms of their impact on England's bowling over a sustained period. And generally speaking, the style of bowlers that they were, although one could argue that Fred Trueman at his peak was a faster and perhaps more hostile bowler than either Broad or Anderson, and this was something that certainly led to him having fallouts, especially with the opposition crowds at the time, who didn't really like the fact that on occasions he would hit a batsman on the body and then appear indifferent to the batsman showing pain. Certainly living up to his fiery persona as a hard, straight-talking, no-nonsense Yorkshireman.
And what did the bouncer mean to you? What were you trying to do when you bowled the bouncer? Were you trying to hit him?
No, the bouncer was a thing that was bowled as a shock delivery. You know, you got people on the front foot, making them play off the front foot, and then suddenly you would fire the bouncer in, once again, wrong-footing them. Cricket is the greatest game in the world, because it is the greatest leveller in the world. One day you've got 6 for 10. Against a good side. You come up next day against a poor side and you think, I'm going to get some wickets here because they're not a very good side. And you've got 1 for 90 or none for 100. And as a batsman, you've got 120, 130 against a good side and you think, this is a piece of cake. And you get against a weak bowling side and you think, I must get 100 here if I use my loaf and play correctly. And suddenly, third or fourth ball, you're back in the pavilion, your stumps is flat for naught, and your feet are firmly back on the ground. This game never allows you to get too big. It always levels you. It always puts your feet back on the ground. And that is the great thing about the game. It's the greatest leveller in the world.
So having talked through some of these names, it's becoming clear, really, as I say, that this was a very happy and successful period for English cricket. And you can tell how many of these players were regarded as legends in their own right, because quite a few of them have parts of grounds named after them across test match venues today. After all, you don't name a stand at Lord's or an end at Old Trafford after any old player. Now, the one man I've not yet really mentioned is the off-spinner, Jim Laker. Jim Laker grew up as an orphan in Yorkshire, leaving school in 1939 and going straight into voluntary service in World War II. And having played cricket all of his childhood, he joined Saltaire Cricket Club prior to the war and played in the Bradford League. Now, if you've listened to an earlier episode of Gods and Flannelled Fools, you'll note that this was the club in which Sidney Barnes spent much of his career. So they certainly had a history when it came to talented bowlers. He then joined Surrey after the war, and having taken a hatful of wickets, he was selected to play for the MCC, or be part of the MCC tour of the West Indies in 1947-48. And although this tour was not a happy experience for England, it was a useful experience for him, along with the even more disappointing loss in the Ashes series against Bradman's Invincibles in the summer that followed, that I covered in the last episode. Illness then overtook at the end of the decade, and Laker was left out of the Ashes squad in 1950-51, but he then came back into the team, having helped Surrey to a succession of county championship titles in that period. Now, in 1956, the Australian cricket team under Keith Miller toured England for a 5-match test series in an attempt to regain the Ashes. And Laker was selected by England as the main spinner and took part in all 5 matches. The first test at Trent Bridge, Nottingham, was a low and slow-scoring draw. And the second test at Lord's resulted in a victory for Australia. Well, no surprise there. England's record at the home of cricket has never been that impressive. And the win was largely thanks to 2 5-wicket hauls by Keith Miller, plus an impressive 97 by a young Richie Benaud in the second innings. The third test took place at Headingley, where England drew level in the series with a resounding innings and 42-run victory courtesy of a 100 on a very difficult surface by Peter May, and 2 5-wicket hauls by Jim Laker, helping to bowl Australia out.
That is very good. The swing works, the Oracle again.
The fourth test at Old Trafford, which started on the 26th of July 1956, became known as Laker's match. England won the toss and amassed a score of 459 before bowling Australia out for a paltry 84 in response. Their opening attack of Trevor Bailey and Brian Statham only bowled 10 overs before the spinners were introduced, which tells you something about the state of the pitch. But even then, Laker didn't take any wickets initially from the Warwick Road end until he was switched to the Stretford end. Australia were 62 for 2, with Laker taking another 2 wickets before tea. And then they collapsed to 84 all out in only 37 minutes from the restart. Laker ended the innings by taking the last 7 wickets for only 8 runs in just 22 deliveries. And his final figures in that innings were 9 for 37, whilst Locke, the other spinner, took only 1 for 37. Australia naturally followed on and finished the second day 1 wicket down, although McDonald, their opener, had to retire hurt. And they apparently made a complaint about the pitch that evening, accusing Lancashire County Cricket Club of doctoring the pitch in order to suit spin bowling, which a claim which they denied, though of course it was the same pitch for both sides. It actually looked as if the weather might save them, because less than an hour's play took place on the Saturday due to rain. And of course, in those days, Sunday was a rest day. And then there was only another hour of play on Monday. So by the time play resumed on Tuesday, with only a day to go, Australia, bizarrely, actually had a decent chance of saving the game. Resuming his innings after having had to retire hurt, McDonald put up a very stout resistance with a stubborn 89, and they reached the lunch interval 112 for 2. However, the sun then came out and the ball began to spin quite dramatically, allowing Laker to take 3 more wickets in the afternoon session, running into the Australian tail. And then With an hour of play left in the match, he took his final wicket to give England victory, finishing with figures of 10 for 53 in the second innings and 19 for 90 in the match overall, which is, well, the most remarkable bowling statistics in any form of first-class cricket to this day. England went 2-1 up in the series, and with a draw to follow at the Oval, they were successful in retaining the Ashes. So it was the first time a bowler had ever taken 10 wickets in an innings, and since Jim Laker achieved that, only Anil Kumble has done that in first-class cricket since. And it remains the only time a bowler's taken 19 in a test match. It surpassed Sid Barnes' record of 17 for 159 against South Africa in 1913, which is still that's still in second place as overall match figures to this day. So Saltaire Cricket Club have got quite a bit to chalk up on their wall. Laker would go on to take 46 wickets in the series, agonisingly close to Barnes' 49 in the in that series I mentioned in South Africa. And to talk about it, here are some thoughts from the ex-cricket commentator Michael Charlton during his interview for A View from the Boundary with Brian Johnson.
And Laker's famous 19-wicket feat at Old Trafford. He joined us at Headingley in 1984 during the third test with the West Indies.
Third man, a cover, extra cover, mid-off, mid-on, forward short leg and short fine leg. Burke on 22, Australia 2 for 62. And here's the first ball after tea. Lock bowls to Burke. Here he comes. He bowls. Burke forward is caught here at first slip by Cowdrey. Forward to it. It turned and he edged it. Cowdrey dived to his right and Burke is out.
The famous match, and that was a very significant wicket for one very good reason, wasn't it?
Yes, the only one poor old Lockie got. It was remarkable, wasn't it, really, that one man, two first-class, world-class spinners, one of whom gets 19 and the other gets only one.
Well, Tony Locke's still trying to work it out, so Jim Laker says. And Jim Laker, of course, got his all from the same end, the Stretford Road end. He got his 19 wickets, and Lockie bowled from that end as well.
Yes. So it was the same for both. I remember going out to that wicket when it was all over, you know. And what I shall never forget was a small circle on a length, on-off stump, in which it looked as if a whole series of 2-shilling pieces had been put down, and that was Laker. He bowled absolutely on this spot. I thought he was just about unplayable.
Well, now, travelling around with the team, you get to know all their feelings and inner secrets. What was there? I mean, publicly they say, the pitch was all made to measure for Laker, although, in fact, we made 459 on it.
The same for both sides, wasn't it? There was a lot of controversy about that pitch. I think the Australians thought they'd been taken for a ride. They thought that pitch at Old Trafford at that time was not the traditional one. Some new soil had been put on it and all that kind of thing, but it was the same for both sides.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. McDonald made 32, Burke 22, who you described out. Everybody else made single figures. They're out for 84 in the first innings.
Yes, it was terrible, wasn't it? Not a happy tour all round, I think, that one for the Australians. They were on a down swing that time. I think also that they weren't as well led as they might have been. I think there was
So, all in all, an extraordinary performance from Jim Laker, although one that very nearly failed to happen given the weather over that weekend in Manchester. And in fact, had there not have been a rest day, the match would have ended in a draw and he wouldn't have ended up in the history books. As you might expect, Jim Laker drew huge praise for his performance and gave English support a great amount to cheer about as he helped them to retain the Ashes. But the response was quite different from the Aussies, who were not happy at all in the manner in which the pitch had been prepared to take spin. And the sports cartoonist Roy Ouellette captured the moment with a famous illustration of a dazed kangaroo in an Australian strip, and the words, "Here lies the ashes of 56, skittled by Laker for next to nix. Never forgotten, sorry you thought our wicket rotten, signed, love from the ground staff." And this note refers to the Australian complaints that the grass had been shaved off the Old Trafford wicket in order to help the English spinners by the Lancastrian ground staff. But aside from the bitterness and unhappiness, there was one particular member of the Australian side who gave genuine praise for Laker, and that was the young leg spinner Richie Benaud, who analysed his performance and decided, rather than to complain, to actually use that as a motivating factor. He shortened his own run-up as a result of Laker's success, and it certainly helped him as he went on to lead Australia to great success over the course of the years that followed, especially during his heyday in the early 1960s. Jim Laker would end his international career 3 years later with 193 wickets from 46 tests at only 21.24, and was by far the most successful English spin bowler of this era, only having been surpassed by two men since that point, the first being Derek Underwood and the second being Graham Swan. Now, I've mentioned quite a few players in this episode, and indeed some of the names, such as Hutton and Bedser, had already retired prior to the 1956 series, and a number of the others, including Laker, faded out as the very, very successful decade came to a close. And with it, the brightness and enthusiasm of the 50s gave way to a far less successful decade for the English cricket team in the 1960s. And we'll take a look at one of the most memorable test series in that decade in the next episode. Until then, please like and comment on my videos. Thank you for listening to Gods and Flannelled Fools. Bye for now.